The rain had started around 7 that evening, turning the streets of downtown Chicago into glossy rivers of reflected neon. Inside Sullivan's Steakhouse, the atmosphere was warm, muffled by velvet curtains and the low hum of conversations that only money could afford to keep quiet. Grace Thompson moved between the tables like a shadow, silent, efficient, invisible. She'd worked at Sullivan's for 6 years, and in that time she'd perfected the art of disappearing. Not physically, of course. She was always there, always present, wiping down surfaces, refilling water glasses, clearing plates still warm from expensive meals. But to the patrons, she might as well have been a ghost. At 42, Grace had learned not to expect eye contact. She'd learned not to wait for a thank you. She'd learned that her uniform, black slacks, white button-down shirt, a simple apron tied at her waist, was a kind of armor that made her both essential and utterly forgettable. Tonight was no different. The dinner rush had been steady but manageable. Couples celebrating anniversaries, business deals being sealed over ribeyes and aged whiskey, a few solo diners buried in their phones, chewing without tasting. Grace moved through it all with practiced precision, her dark hands quick and sure as she cleared table after table, her expression neutral, her thoughts elsewhere. She was thinking about her daughter, Naomi, 14 now, growing too fast, asking questions Grace didn't always know how to answer. Questions about college, about dreams, about whether working hard really meant anything if no one ever saw you doing it. Grace didn't have answers. She just had rent to pay and a shift to finish. At 9:47 p.m. he walked in. Grace noticed him immediately, not because he made a scene but because he didn't. Most wealthy men who dined alone at Sullivan's wanted to be seen. They wore their success like cologne, heavy and obvious. But this man was different. He moved with a kind of quiet authority, his tailored charcoal suit fitting him like it had been drawn onto his body. Mid-30s maybe. Sharp jawline, dark hair swept back, eyes that seemed to look through things rather than at them. He didn't glance at the hostess, didn't smile, just nodded once when she gestured toward a corner booth, then walked there without hesitation, as if he'd already decided where he belonged. Grace watched from across the room as he sat down, pulled out his phone and became immediately absorbed. No greeting to the waiter, no interest in the menu, just fingers moving across a screen, his expression unreadable. Tyler, one of the younger servers, approached the table with his usual energy. Grace couldn't hear the exchange, but she saw Tyler's smile falter slightly, saw him nod, saw him walk away a minute later with an order that had clearly been delivered in as few words as possible. "Cold one, huh?" Maria, another cleaner, muttered as she passed Grace with a tray of dirty dishes. Grace said nothing. She'd seen cold before. She'd cleaned up after cold 1,000 times. If you're enjoying this story and want to see what happens next, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what Grace discovers next. The man, Grace would later learn his name was Ethan Caldwell, ate slowly, methodically, never once looking up from his phone. Tyler brought him water, bread, a perfect medium-rare filet mignon with roasted asparagus. Each time Tyler tried to engage, each time he was met with silence or a barely perceptible nod. Grace had seen this dance before. Some people treated service staff like furniture, not out of malice necessarily, just absence, a complete lack of awareness that the person standing beside them was a person at all. By 10:35 p.m., Ethan Caldwell was finished. He stood, smoothed his jacket, and walked toward the exit without a word. Didn't thank Tyler. Didn't acknowledge the hostess who wished him a good evening. Just left, his shoes clicking against the marble floor until the sound was swallowed by the rain outside. Tyler stood frozen for a moment, staring at the empty booth. Then he picked up the small black folder containing the bill. Grace saw his face change, saw the way his shoulders dropped, saw him shake his head slowly, bitterly. She knew that look. Wordlessly, Grace moved toward the table. Tyler had already walked away, muttering something under his breath about entitled pricks. Mr. Hayes, the night manager, was busy at the host stand. The other cleaners were occupied with their own sections. So it was Grace who approached the booth. Grace who began stacking plates, wiping crumbs, collecting silverware. Grace who reached for the black folder left carelessly open on the table. The bill was $287, $50. At the bottom, in the space marked tip, someone had written a clear, decisive $0. Source Grace felt the familiar sting. Not surprised, not anymore, but something duller, more resigned. She'd gotten $0 tips before. She'd been stiffed, ignored, treated like air. This wasn't new, but as she picked up the folder to throw the receipt away, something made her pause. There was writing on the back of the bill, handwriting. Black ink, slightly smudged as if written quickly. Grace flipped the paper over. Her breath caught. There, scrawled in neat block letters, was a name. David Thornton. Grace's heart stuttered. She read it again, certain she was mistaken. But no, the letters were clear, unmistakable. David Thornton. She knew that name. Of course she knew that name. David Thornton had been her husband's best friend. They'd grown up together on the South Side, two black kids dreaming of something bigger than the neighborhood would allow. David had gone into finance, made it out, made it big. Grace's husband, Marcus, had stayed behind, working construction until a scaffolding accident took him 8 years ago. David had come to the funeral, had shaken Grace's hand with tears in his eyes, had promised to stay in touch to help if she ever needed anything. She hadn't heard from him since, and now his name was here, on the back of a bill, left behind by a stranger who hadn't said a single word to her. Why? Grace's hands trembled as she held the paper. She looked around the restaurant, half expecting someone to be watching her, waiting for her reaction, but no one was paying attention. The dining room was nearly empty now, just the soft clink of dishes being cleared, the murmur of the last few patrons finishing their wine. She folded the receipt carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket. Her mind raced. Was this a coincidence? A mistake? But how would this man, Ethan Caldwell or whatever his name was, know David's name? And why write it down? Why leave it for her to find? Unless he knew she would find it. Grace's pulse quickened. She forced herself to keep moving, keep cleaning, keep her face neutral even as her thoughts spiraled. She dumped the plates into a gray bin, wiped down the table with mechanical precision, replaced the silverware. But inside, everything had shifted. Grace? She turned sharply. Mr. Hayes stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable. Someone's asking for you at the front. Grace's stomach dropped. For me? Yeah. Hayes frowned slightly. Tall guy. Just walked back in. Says he needs to speak with you specifically. Grace's mouth went dry. She glanced toward the entrance, but from where she stood she couldn't see the host stand. Did he say what it's about? She asked quietly. Hayes shrugged. No, but he seemed insistent. You know him? Grace didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because the truth was she didn't know. But something told her that the man waiting for her at the front, the man who'd left $0 and a dead man's name, had just turned her invisible, forgettable life into something else entirely. Something she wasn't sure she was ready for. Grace's legs felt unsteady as she walked toward the front of the restaurant. The dining room, which moments ago had felt warm and familiar, now seemed too bright, too exposed. Every step echoed in her mind louder than it should have. Mr. Hayes followed a few paces behind, his presence somehow making everything worse. He wasn't suspicious, not yet, but he was curious, and curiosity from management was never good for someone like Grace. People in her position were supposed to be predictable, reliable, unremarkable. Being singled out, being asked for by name, broke that unwritten rule. As she rounded the corner near the host stand, Grace saw him. Ethan Caldwell stood near the entrance, his back to her, staring out at the rain-slicked street through the restaurant's tall windows. His posture was rigid, controlled, like someone who'd learned long ago not to waste movement. The charcoal suit he wore still looked immaculate despite the weather outside, not a thread out of place. For a moment, Grace considered turning around, pretending she hadn't heard. But Hayes was right behind her, and besides, she needed to know, needed to understand why David Thornton's name was burning a hole in her apron pocket. Sir? Hayes said, his voice taking on that particular tone of manufactured politeness reserved for wealthy customers. This is Grace Thompson. You asked to speak with her? Ethan turned slowly. His eyes found Grace's immediately, and for the first time that evening, he really looked at her. Not through her, not past her, at her. Grace felt something shift in her chest. Not fear exactly, but recognition of something significant happening. Something she couldn't yet name. Ms. Thompson, Ethan said. His voice was quieter than she'd expected, measured and deliberate. I apologize for the unusual request. I need just a moment of your time. Hayes glanced between them, clearly uncertain. Is everything all right? Was there an issue with your meal, sir? No issue. Ethan's eyes never left Grace's face. The meal was excellent. I simply need to speak with Ms. Thompson privately. It's personal. Personal. The word hung in the air like smoke. Hayes hesitated, then nodded slowly. All right, Grace, take 5 minutes, but we're still on the clock, so… I understand, Grace said quietly. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, steadier than she felt. Hayes walked back toward the kitchen, though Grace could feel him glancing over his shoulder. She and Ethan stood in the small alcove near the entrance, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle, like cedar and rain. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Grace reached into her apron and pulled out the folded receipt. She held it up between them, her hand remarkably steady. Why did you leave this? She asked. No preamble, no politeness, just the question that had been screaming in her head since she'd found it. Ethan looked at the paper, then back at her face. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or respect. You found it, he said simply. Of course I found it. You left it for me to find. Grace's voice was firmer now, years of being ignored suddenly crystallizing into something sharper. You knew I'd be the one cleaning that table. You knew I'd see it. So I'm asking you again, why? Ethan was quiet for a moment, studying her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small business card. He held it out to her. Grace didn't take it immediately. She looked at the card, at his hand, at his face. I'm not here to hurt you, Ethan said quietly, or to cause you trouble. But I need to know if you recognize that name, if it means something to you. It means something, Grace said carefully. David Thornton was my husband's best friend. They grew up together. David came to Marcus's funeral 8 years ago, and I haven't heard from him since. Now you show up, leave his name on a bill with no tip, and expect me to… what? Trust you? Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. The zero tip was deliberate. I needed to make sure you'd handle the table yourself. I needed to ensure you'd be the one to find the name. Why? Because David Thornton is dead. The words hit Grace like a physical blow. She took an involuntary step back, her shoulder brushing against the wall. What? He died 3 weeks ago. Ethan continued, his voice low and controlled. And before he died, he told me to find you. He said if anything happened to him, I needed to make sure you knew. He said you were the only person he could trust with what he'd discovered. Grace's mind reeled. David dead? She'd lost touch with him years ago, but the news still carved something hollow in her chest. Another connection to Marcus gone. Another ghost. I don't understand, she whispered. Trust me with what? I'm nobody. I clean tables. I haven't spoken to David in almost a decade. Why would he… Because you're invisible, Ethan interrupted. That's exactly why. Grace stared at him. Ethan glanced toward the dining room, then back at her. David worked in finance, high-level stuff, hedge funds, private equity, deals worth hundreds of millions. 3 months ago, he stumbled onto something he wasn't supposed to see. A money laundering operation running through one of the firms he audited. Massive, international, connected to people who don't leave witnesses. Grace felt her heart hammering against her ribs. And they killed him? The official report says heart attack, Ethan said. 46 years old, found dead in his apartment, no signs of struggle. No autopsy ordered because the family accepted the initial finding. But David knew it was coming. He'd been documenting everything, building a case, trying to figure out who he could trust at the SEC, at the FBI. But everyone he approached either dismissed him or… Ethan paused. Or ended up dead too. Jesus, Grace breathed. 2 weeks before he died, David contacted me. Ethan continued. We'd worked together years ago. He trusted me. He gave me a copy of everything he'd found. Files, recordings, transaction records. But he was paranoid, convinced they were already watching him. So he made a backup plan. He told me that if anything happened to him, I needed to find a woman named Grace Thompson, a cleaning woman at Sullivan's Steakhouse in Chicago. He said you were someone who understood what it meant to be overlooked, someone who knew how to survive by staying out of sight. Grace's throat was tight. He remembered me. He never forgot you, Ethan said quietly. He told me you were one of the smartest people he'd ever known. Said Marcus used to brag about how you'd helped him plan jobs, manage crews, negotiate contracts. Said you had a mind for details, for seeing patterns other people missed. He said if he needed someone to hold on to something dangerous, someone no one would ever suspect, it would be you. Grace shook her head slowly, trying to process. But he never gave me anything. I haven't seen David in years. I don't have… He couldn't risk sending it to you directly, Ethan said. Too obvious. Too easy to trace. So he sent it somewhere else. Somewhere connected to you but not directly. Somewhere you'd have access to, but no one would think to look. Grace felt cold suddenly, despite the warmth of the restaurant. Where? Ethan looked at her steadily. Your daughter's school. The world seemed to tilt. Naomi? David sent a package to the administrative office at Woodrow Wilson High School 3 weeks ago. It's addressed to Grace Thompson, parent. It's sitting in the front office right now, waiting for you to pick it up. No one's opened it. No one knows what's inside, but I'm guessing it's everything David collected, everything that got him killed. Grace couldn't breathe. Her hands were shaking now, the receipt crumpling between her fingers. Why are you telling me this? If this information is so dangerous, why drag me into it? Because you're already in it, Ethan said, and for the first time, she heard something like regret in his voice. David made sure of that. He thought he was protecting you by keeping you hidden, by making you the last person anyone would suspect. But now that he's dead, you're the only link left to what he found. And if the people who killed him figure that out, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Grace pressed her back against the wall, trying to steady herself. Who are you? She asked. Really? Ethan hesitated, then pulled out the business card again and pressed it into her hand. This time, she looked at it. Ethan Caldwell, private investigator, corporate fraud, and asset recovery. David hired me 2 months ago to help him investigate the money laundering operation, Ethan said. I've been working this case ever since, but I'm running out of time. The people behind this are cleaning house. Anyone connected to David is being watched, questioned, or worse. I came here tonight to warn you, to tell you what you're sitting on, and to give you a choice. A choice? You can walk away, Ethan said. Pick up that package, destroy it. Pretend none of this ever happened. Go back to being invisible. Maybe they'll never connect you to David. Maybe you'll be safe. And the other option? Ethan's eyes were hard now, certain. You help me. You let me see what's in that package. Together we finish what David started. We expose these people. We make sure he didn't die for nothing. Grace stared at him, her mind spinning. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to refuse, to protect Naomi and herself from whatever nightmare David had accidentally pulled them into. But another part of her, the part that had spent 6 years being invisible, being ignored, being treated like she didn't matter, that part wanted to know what David had seen in her, wanted to know if she really was as smart, as capable, as necessary as he'd believed. I need time, she said finally. You don't have time, Ethan said bluntly. If I found you, they can too. You need to get that package tomorrow, and you need to decide if you're going to trust me. Why should I trust you? Grace shot back. You show up, leave cryptic messages, tell me my life is in danger, and expect me to, because David trusted me, Ethan interrupted, and because right now, I'm the only person standing between you and the people who murdered him. The words hung heavy between them. Grace looked down at the business card in her hand, then at Ethan's face. She thought of Naomi, 14, and dreaming of college, of a future Grace had sacrificed everything to build. She thought of Marcus, dead 8 years, and David dead 3 weeks, and all the invisible people who worked and suffered and disappeared without anyone noticing. I'll think about it, she said quietly. Ethan nodded slowly. That's all I'm asking. But Grace, he paused, his expression softening slightly. Be careful. Don't tell anyone about this conversation. Don't trust anyone. And whatever you do, don't open that package alone. Before Grace could respond, Hayes appeared at the edge of the alcove, clearing his throat pointedly. Grace, we need you back on the floor. Grace looked at Ethan one last time. He held her gaze for a moment, then turned and walked out into the rain without another word. She watched him disappear into the night, her hand still clutching his business card, her mind racing with impossible questions and terrifying possibilities. Behind her, the restaurant hummed with ordinary life, dishes clanking, conversations murmuring, the world continuing as if nothing had changed, but everything had changed. Grace Thompson, the invisible woman, was suddenly the center of something deadly, and tomorrow morning she would have to decide what to do about it. Grace didn't sleep that night. She lay in her small bedroom in the Englewood apartment she shared with Naomi, staring at the water-stained ceiling, listening to the sound of distant traffic and the occasional wail of sirens. The business card sat on her nightstand like a live grenade, innocuous white cardstock that somehow contained the weight of her entire future. Ethan Caldwell's words played on an endless loop in her mind. David Thornton is dead. You're already in it. Don't open that package alone. At 3:47 a.m., Grace got up and walked to Naomi's room. She stood in the doorway, watching her daughter sleep, one arm flung over her head, her braids spread across the pillow. her face peaceful in a way that made Grace's chest ache. Naomi didn't know that their lives had just been upended, didn't know that a dead man had made her mother the keeper of secrets dangerous enough to kill for, didn't know that tomorrow Grace would have to walk into her school and retrieve a package that might destroy everything they'd built. Grace pulled the door closed softly and returned to her room. She picked up Ethan's card again, turned it over in her hands. The edges were sharp, precise, professional. She thought about David Thornton, remembered him as a young man at Marcus's funeral, his expensive suit somehow looking wrong on him, like he'd borrowed someone else's skin. He'd hugged her, told her Marcus had been his brother, promised he'd be there if she ever needed anything. She'd never called. Pride, maybe? Or the quiet understanding that people from David's world didn't really want people from hers cluttering up their lives. But he'd remembered her, had thought of her in his final days, had trusted her with something he couldn't trust to anyone else. Grace set the card down and made her decision. She would get the package. She would see what David had died protecting, and then, only then, would she decide whether to trust Ethan Caldwell or run as far as she possibly could. Morning came cold and gray, the November sky heavy with the promise of more rain. Grace got Naomi up at 6:30, made her scrambled eggs and toast, packed her lunch with the same mechanical efficiency she brought to clearing tables at Sullivan's. "You okay, Mom?" Naomi asked as she shouldered her backpack. "You look tired." "Just didn't sleep well," Grace said, forcing a smile. "You have that math test today, right?" "History," Naomi corrected. "The Civil War unit. I'm ready, though, studied all weekend." Grace pulled her daughter into a hug, held her perhaps a second longer than necessary. "You're going to do great. I love you." Naomi squeezed back, then pulled away with a slightly puzzled smile. "Love you too, Mom, you're being weird." "I'm always weird." "True." Naomi grinned and headed for the door. "See you tonight." The apartment felt impossibly empty after she left. Grace stood in the small kitchen, staring at the coffee maker, trying to summon the courage for what came next. At 8:15 a.m., she called Sullivan's and told them she'd be 2 hours late. Family emergency. Mr. Hayes wasn't happy, but he agreed. Grace had never missed a shift in 6 years. She'd earned that much grace. At 8:45 a.m., Grace walked through the front doors of Woodrow Wilson High School. The administrative office was exactly as she remembered. Fluorescent lights humming overhead, motivational posters peeling at the corners, the smell of industrial cleaner and old paper. Mrs. Henderson, the front desk receptionist, looked up from her computer with practiced bureaucratic indifference. "Can I help you?" "Grace Thompson," Grace said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm Naomi Thompson's mother. I was told there's a package here for me." Mrs. Henderson's expression didn't change. She turned to her computer, typed slowly. Let me check." Her fingers moved across the keyboard with the speed of continental drift. "Yes, arrived 3 weeks ago. We tried calling, but the number on file went to voicemail. Grace's cell phone had been disconnected for 5 days last month when money was tight. She hadn't thought anyone would notice. "Can I get it now?" Grace asked. "ID, please." Grace handed over her driver's license. Mrs. Henderson studied it with the intensity of a TSA agent, then finally nodded and disappeared into a back room. Grace's heart hammered. She glanced around the office, empty except for her. Through the window, she could see students moving between classes, their voices muffled, their faces young and unconcerned. Mrs. Henderson returned, carrying a medium-sized manila envelope, roughly 8 by 10 inches, slightly thick. It was sealed with clear packing tape, and Grace's name was written across the front in neat black marker. "Sign here," Mrs. Henderson said, sliding a clipboard across the counter. Grace signed with a hand that trembled only slightly. She took the envelope, felt its weight. Not heavy, but substantial. Something solid inside. Papers, maybe. Or a flash drive. "Thank you," Grace said quietly. Mrs. Henderson had already returned her attention to her computer. Grace walked out of the office, down the hallway lined with lockers and bulletin boards advertising drama club tryouts and fundraisers. She kept the envelope pressed against her chest, hidden under her jacket, as if everyone could see what she was carrying. She was halfway to the exit when she saw him. A man stood near the trophy case by the front entrance, apparently studying the dusty achievements of Wilson High's basketball teams from 1987. But his posture was wrong, too rigid, too alert. He wore a dark jacket and jeans, nothing obviously threatening, but something about him made Grace's instincts scream danger. She slowed her pace, trying to decide whether to turn around, find another exit. But the man's eyes had already found hers. He straightened slightly, and Grace saw recognition flicker across his face. He knew who she was. Grace's mind raced. She thought of Ethan's warning. "If I found you, they can too." The man started walking toward her, his movements casual but purposeful. Grace's fingers tightened around the envelope. Her options flashed through her mind in rapid succession. Run, scream, confront him. Instead, she did something unexpected. She turned and walked directly toward the main office again, pushing through the door with enough force to make Mrs. Henderson look up in surprise. "I need to speak with Principal Morrison," Grace said loudly, her voice carrying authority she didn't know she possessed. "Right now, it's urgent." Mrs. Henderson blinked. "Do you have an appointment?" "This is regarding a safety concern," Grace said, locking eyes with the receptionist. "A man just followed me into this building, and I don't believe he's authorized to be here." That got Mrs. Henderson's attention. School security was no joke, especially in Chicago. She reached for her phone immediately. Grace glanced back through the office window. The man had stopped in the hallway, still visible but no longer approaching. He was talking on his cell phone now, his eyes fixed on the office entrance. Within 90 seconds, Coach Martinez, who doubled as security during morning hours, appeared in the hallway. He was a large man, ex-military, with the kind of presence that made teenage boys reconsider their life choices. Grace watched through the window as Martinez approached the man, spoke to him. The man shook his head, gestured as if to explain, but Martinez wasn't interested. He pointed toward the exit, his body language leaving no room for argument. The man hesitated, glanced once more toward the office where Grace stood watching, then turned and walked out of the building. "Ma'am?" Mrs. Henderson's voice pulled Grace back. "Coach Martinez is handling it. Did that man threaten you?" "No," Grace said carefully, "but he made me uncomfortable. Thank you for calling security." "Of course. Do you want to file a report?" "No, Thank you." Grace waited another 5 minutes, watching through the windows until she was certain the man was gone. Then she left through a side exit, the one near the gym that opened onto a different street. She walked quickly, the envelope still pressed against her body, her mind spinning. Someone had been watching the school, waiting for her, which meant Ethan was right. They knew about her connection to David, which meant she was out of time. Grace didn't go to work. She called Mr. Hayes again, lied about a doctor's appointment, promised she'd be in by evening shift. He was less understanding this time, but she was beyond caring. Instead, she went to the one place she thought might be safe, the Harold Washington Library downtown. It was massive, anonymous, filled with hundreds of people reading, studying, existing in their own bubbles of concentration. Grace found a study carrel on the 4th floor, tucked into a corner with a view of the elevator and stairs. She sat down, placed the envelope on the desk in front of her, and stared at it for a long moment. "Don't open that package alone," Ethan had warned. But Grace was alone, had been alone for 8 years, since Marcus died, had been alone in ways that mattered long before that. She opened the envelope. Inside was a USB flash drive, small, black, unremarkable. Taped to it was a folded piece of paper. Grace unfolded it with shaking hands. The note was handwritten in blue ink, the letters slightly rushed. "Grace, if you're reading this, I'm probably dead. I'm sorry to drag you into this. I'm sorry I never stayed in touch after Marcus passed. I'm sorry for a lot of things. The drive contains everything I found. Transaction records, audio recordings, names, dates, account numbers. It's proof of a money laundering operation running $3 billion through legitimate financial institutions. 12 people are involved, including 2 federal judges, a senator, and the CEO of Meridian Holdings. I tried to go through proper channels. Everyone I contacted either ignored me or ended up dead. I'm being followed. My apartment was searched. I don't know who to trust anymore, except you. Marcus always said you were the smartest person he knew. He said you saw things other people missed, patterns and connections that weren't obvious. I need you to see this, Grace. I need someone who won't be corrupted or scared off. There's a reporter at the Chicago Tribune, Melissa Chen. She's investigated corporate fraud before. She's clean. If you're reading this and I'm gone, give her the drive. Tell her everything. Don't trust the police. Don't trust the FBI. Half of them are on Meridian's payroll. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this, but you're invisible, Grace. That's your superpower. Use it. Stay safe. And tell Naomi about her Uncle David. Tell her I never forgot. DT. Grace read the note 3 times, her throat tight, her eyes burning. David had known he was going to die, had known and still tried to fight, had trusted her with his last desperate gamble. She looked at the flash drive, then at the library computers nearby. She could plug it in right now, see what David had died protecting, but something made her hesitate. If the drive contained what David claimed, if it really could take down federal judges and senators, then the moment she looked at it, she became a target. Not just a potential liability, but an active threat. Grace pulled out her phone and stared at Ethan Caldwell's business card, which she'd tucked into her wallet that morning. She thought about the man at Naomi's school, about David's note, about Melissa Chen at the Tribune. She thought about Marcus, dead under scaffolding that shouldn't have fallen, dead in an accident that was ruled accidental, despite every instinct Grace had screaming otherwise. She thought about invisibility, about powerlessness, about 6 years of cleaning up after people who never saw her, and she made her choice. Grace dialed Ethan's number. He answered on the first ring. "Grace, I have it," she said quietly. "David's package, and we need to talk, right now." There was a pause. Then, "Where are you?" "The Herald Washington Library, 4th floor, southeast corner." "Stay there, don't move, I'm 20 minutes away." "Ethan," Grace hesitated. "Someone was waiting at my daughter's school. They knew I was coming for the package." Another pause, longer this time. When Ethan spoke again, his voice was harder, more urgent. "Did they follow you?" "I don't think so. I lost them." "Good. Stay in public. Stay visible. I'm on my way." The line went dead. Grace sat back in her chair, the flash drive heavy in her hand, David's note folded in her lap. Around her, the library hummed with ordinary life, students studying, elderly men reading newspapers, a mother helping her child with homework. She wondered if any of them had ever held someone's life in their hands, had ever been forced to decide between safety and justice, between invisibility and purpose. Grace Thompson, who had spent 6 years being nobody, was about to become somebody very dangerous, and there was no going back. 17 minutes later, Grace saw Ethan Caldwell emerge from the elevator on the 4th floor. He moved with the same controlled precision she remembered from the restaurant, his eyes scanning the space methodically before finding her in the corner carrel. He wore jeans and a dark sweater today, less formal but no less purposeful. He crossed the floor quickly, pulled out the chair across from her and sat down without preamble. "Show me." Grace hesitated, her hand hovering over the flash drive. Now that he was here, physically present and demanding, doubt crept in. What did she really know about Ethan Caldwell? A business card? A story about David? For all she knew, he could be one of the people David had been running from. Ethan seemed to read her hesitation. "You don't trust me. I don't know you," Grace said quietly. "Fair." Ethan leaned back slightly, giving her space. "David told me you'd be smart, that you wouldn't just hand over everything because someone asked nicely. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you something that only David and I knew, something I haven't told anyone else, and something that puts me at risk if you're not who I think you are." Grace waited. "David hired me 8 weeks ago," Ethan said, his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry beyond their carol. "He paid me $20,000 up front to investigate Meridian Holdings and their financial network. But that's not why I kept working after he died. I kept working because my sister, Amanda, worked at Meridian. She was a junior accountant, fresh out of Northwestern, excited about her first real job. 6 months ago, she noticed irregularities in some offshore accounts. She mentioned it to her supervisor. 3 days later, she drove her car off a bridge in Wisconsin. Grace felt her stomach drop. Oh my God. The police ruled it an accident, Ethan continued, his jaw tight. Said she lost control on black ice. But Amanda grew up in Chicago. She knew how to drive in winter, and her car had been serviced 2 weeks before. Everything was perfect. I didn't believe it was an accident, but I couldn't prove anything. Until David contacted me. Until he told me about the money laundering, about the pattern of deaths, about Meridian systematically eliminating anyone who got too close. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through photos, then turned the screen toward Grace. A young black woman smiled at the camera, her arm around Ethan's shoulders, both of them laughing at what looked like a family barbecue. Amanda had her brother's eyes, sharp, intelligent, alive. She was 24, Ethan said quietly, had her whole life ahead of her, and they killed her because she asked the wrong question. Grace looked at the photo, then at Ethan's face. She saw the grief there, carefully controlled but unmistakable. Saw the rage underneath, cold and precise as a scalpel. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. Ethan took the phone back, pocketed it. "So when I tell you I want to take these people down, I'm not talking about justice in the abstract. I'm talking about making them pay for what they did to Amanda, to David, to everyone they've destroyed. That's why you can trust me, Grace. Because we want the same thing. Grace studied him for a long moment, weighing her options. Then she slid David's note across the table. Ethan read it carefully, his expression darkening with each line. When he finished, he looked up at Grace. You opened the envelope. I did. I told you not to open it alone. I'm not good at following orders, Grace said evenly. Spent too many years taking them. Something that might have been respect flickered across Ethan's face. Fair enough. Have you looked at what's on the drive? No. I wanted to wait for you, or decide if I should just destroy it and pretend this never happened. Is that what you want to do? Grace thought about it. About Naomi? About their small apartment, about the life she'd carefully constructed from the ruins of Marcus's death. A life built on invisibility and survival. A life that was hers, even if it was small. But she also thought about David's note. About Marcus, whose accident had never felt quite right. About Ethan's sister Amanda, 24 and dead on a Wisconsin bridge. About all the invisible people who'd been crushed by machines too big to fight. No, Grace said finally. I want to see what David found. I want to know what was worth dying for. Ethan nodded slowly. Then let's look, but not here, too exposed. We need somewhere private, somewhere we can't be interrupted or watched. Where? I have an office. Small place in the Loop. 3rd floor walk-up. No cameras in the building, no smart security. Old school. Safe. Grace hesitated. Going to a private location with a man she'd met yesterday. Every instinct screamed danger. But staying here in public meant risk of a different kind. Someone had already tracked her to Naomi's school. They could be watching the library right now. Okay, she said. But I drive myself. I'll follow you. You don't have a car. Grace stared at him. How do you know that? Because I ran a basic background check before I came to the restaurant last night, Ethan said without apology. I needed to know who I was dealing with. Your 2004 Honda Civic was repossessed 9 months ago. You take the bus to work. Your credit score is 5 from 42. You're 3 months behind on rent, but your landlord hasn't filed eviction because you've lived there 7 years and he knows you're good for it eventually. Grace felt heat rise in her face. Not embarrassment, but anger. You had no right. I had every right, Ethan interrupted. David trusted me to protect you, which means I needed to know who you were, what vulnerabilities you had, what pressure points someone might use against you. That's how this works, Grace. Information is survival. And right now, you need to understand that everyone involved in this, on both sides, knows more about you than you're comfortable with. The words stung because they were true. Grace had spent so long being invisible that she'd forgotten what it meant to be seen. Really seen, analyzed, cataloged. It felt like violation, but it was also, she realized, exactly what David had been counting on. Her invisibility had kept her safe. But now that she was visible, she needed to think differently. Fine, she said, we take your car, but if you try anything, you'll what? Ethan asked, not unkindly. Grace, I'm not trying to intimidate you, but you need to understand the reality. You're a 42-year-old woman who weighs maybe 130. I'm 6'2" and 190. If I wanted to hurt you, I could, but I don't. I want to work with you. I want to finish what David started, and I need you to trust me enough to let that happen. Grace met his eyes. Saw calculation there, yes, but also sincerity and desperation. He'd lost his sister. He was running out of time. He needed her as much as she needed him. All right, she said finally. Let's go to your office. Ethan's car was a dark gray Jeep Cherokee, nondescript and practical. He drove carefully through downtown traffic, checking his mirrors frequently, taking a route that seemed deliberately circuitous. Grace sat in the passenger seat, the flash drive and note secured in her purse, watching the city slide past. Tell me about Naomi, Ethan said after a few minutes of silence. Grace glanced at him. Why? Because she's your weak point. Because if Meridian figures out you have that drive, they'll use her to get to you. I need to know how to protect her. The words sent ice through Grace's veins. She's 14. She's a kid. She doesn't know anything about this. Doesn't matter. They'll still use her. Ethan turned down a side street, then another. Where is she right now? School, Wilson High. She's got classes until 3:15, then she usually goes to the library to study. Does she have a phone? Yes. Good. Text her. Tell her you're picking her up today after school. Tell her it's important, but don't scare her. 3:15 sharp, front entrance, don't let her take the bus. I'm supposed to work at 3, Grace said. Call in sick or quit. Right now your job doesn't matter. Grace wanted to argue, but he was right. She pulled out her phone and texted Naomi, "Hey, sweetie, picking you up after school today. Front entrance at 3:15. Important. Love you." The response came within seconds. "Everything okay?" Grace typed back. "Everything's fine. Just need to talk to you about something. See you at 3:15. Okay? Love you too, Mom." Grace pocketed the phone, her chest tight. She was lying to her daughter, putting her in danger, dragging her into a nightmare that should never have touched their lives. "She'll be safe," Ethan said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "We'll make sure of it." "How?" "One step at a time." They parked in an alley behind a narrow brick building that looked like it had been there since the 1920s. Ethan led Grace through a back entrance, up 2 flights of stairs that creaked under their weight, to a door marked only with the number 314. Inside, the office was exactly as he'd described. Small, functional, deliberately anonymous. A desk with a laptop, filing cabinets, a small window overlooking the alley. No personal items except a single photo on the desk. Amanda at her college graduation, cap tilted at a jaunty angle. "Sit," Ethan said, gesturing to a chair. He pulled out his laptop, opened it, checked something on the screen. "Computer's clean. No internet connection. Completely offline. Whatever's on that drive, it stays contained." Grace handed him the flash drive. Their fingers brushed, and she felt the strange intimacy of shared danger. Ethan plugged the drive into the laptop. A moment later, folders appeared on the screen. Grace moved closer, looking over his shoulder. There were dozens of files. Excel spreadsheets, audio recordings, scanned documents, even video files. Each was labeled with cryptic abbreviations and dates. Ethan opened the first spreadsheet. Rows and rows of transactions. Dates, amounts, account numbers, routing codes. Millions of dollars moving through shell companies with names like Pacific Ventures LLC and Redwood Capital Holdings. "Jesus," Ethan breathed. David wasn't exaggerating. This is massive." He opened another file. A scanned memo from Meridian Holdings CFO to someone named Richard Keating, discussing irregularities requiring immediate attention and potential exposure to federal scrutiny. Then an audio file. Ethan pressed play. A man's voice, cultured and cold. "Don't care what it takes, the auditor has to go. Make it look natural. Heart attack, car accident, I don't care, but it happens this week." Another voice, younger. "Understood. What about his files?" "Sanitized. Everything disappears. If anyone asks questions..." Ethan stopped the recording. His face was pale, his jaw clenched so tight Grace could see the muscle jumping. "That's Gerald Kensington," he said quietly. "CEO of Meridian Holdings. Recorded by David 3 weeks before he died." Grace felt sick. She was listening to a man order a murder as casually as someone might order coffee. And that murder, she realized with growing horror, had been David's. "There's more," Ethan said, clicking through files. Bank records showing payments to offshore accounts. Names of politicians receiving consulting fees. Photos of meetings that were supposed to be secret. David documented everything. "It's enough," Grace said. "It's enough to take them all down, isn't it?" "It should be," Ethan said grimly. "But David tried to take it to the authorities and they either ignored him or killed him. We need to be smarter. We need to go public in a way they can't suppress or contain." "The reporter," Grace said, remembering David's note. "Melissa Chen at the Tribune." "Yes." Ethan closed the laptop, ejected the flash drive. "But we need to be careful. If we just hand this over, Chen might not believe it. She'll need context, corroboration, proof that we're not conspiracy theorists or blackmailers, and we need to make sure she can protect herself once she has it. How do we do that?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, thinking. "We need insurance. Multiple copies of the files. Evidence sent to different people, different locations. We need to make it so that killing us doesn't solve their problem. It makes it worse." Grace understood the logic, but the reality terrified her. They were about to declare war on people who killed as easily as breathing. "What if..." Grace started, then stopped. "What if what?" "What if we're wrong?" Grace said quietly. "What if David was paranoid? What if his death really was a heart attack, and we're about to destroy innocent people's lives based on..." "Listen to that audio recording again," Ethan said, his voice hard. "Listen to Kensington ordering someone killed. That's not paranoia, Grace, that's evidence." He was right. She knew he was right. But the weight of what they were about to do felt crushing. Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned. "I need to make a call. Give me a minute." He stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind him. Grace sat alone in the small office, surrounded by evidence of evil, wondering how her life had gone from invisible to dangerous in less than 24 hours. She looked at Amanda's graduation photo on the desk, thought about all the bright futures that had been extinguished to protect money and power, thought about Naomi, about the world her daughter would inherit if people like Kensington were allowed to continue. The door opened. Ethan stepped back in, his expression grim. "What's wrong?" Grace asked. "That was my contact at the Tribune. Melissa Chen." Ethan paused, his jaw tight. "She died 2 days ago. Car accident on Lakeshore Drive. Police say she lost control, went into the lake. They're calling it a tragedy." The room seemed to tilt. Grace grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself. "They killed her too," she whispered. "They knew David wanted to contact her, so they're cleaning house," Ethan said. "Everyone connected to this investigation. Everyone who might have information, which means..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Grace Thompson and Ethan Caldwell had just become the last 2 people alive who knew the truth, and time was running out. For a long moment, neither Grace nor Ethan spoke. The small office felt suffocating, the walls pressing in as the implications of Melissa Chen's death settled over them like ash. Grace's mind raced through terrible calculations. If Meridian had killed Chen 2 days ago, they'd known about David's plan to contact her, which meant they'd probably known for weeks, maybe months, which meant they were ahead, had always been ahead. "We need to move," Ethan said finally, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "If they knew about Chen, they might know about me, about this office." "You said this place was safe," Grace said, hearing the edge of panic in her own voice. "I said it was off the grid. That's not the same thing." Ethan was already moving, unplugging his laptop, gathering files. "We need to copy everything on that drive, distribute it to multiple locations, and we need to do it before 3:15 when you pick up Naomi." Grace checked her phone. 11:47 a.m., less than 4 hours. "Where do we go?" she asked. Ethan paused, thinking. "We don't go anywhere together. That's the mistake David made, keeping everything with one person. We split up. You take copies, I take copies, different locations. That way if they find one of us, the other survives," Grace finished. The logic was sound, but it felt like abandonment, like being cut loose in deep water. Ethan must have seen something in her face because his expression softened slightly. "I know this is terrifying, but you're tougher than you think. You've survived 8 years on your own, raised a daughter, held down a job that treats you like furniture. You're not fragile, Grace, you're resilient. That's different." The words shouldn't have mattered, but they did. No one had called Grace resilient before. Strong, maybe. Determined. But resilient suggested something deeper. The ability not just to survive, but to adapt. To keep fighting even when everything felt hopeless. "What's the plan?" Grace asked. Ethan pulled out 3 blank USB drives from his desk drawer. "We copy the files to all 3 drives. You take one, I take one, and we hide the third somewhere neither of us can access easily. Safety deposit box, maybe, or we mail it to someone neither of us knows. Who? I don't know yet, but someone random. Someone Meridian would never think to look at." Ethan began copying files from David's drive to the blank ones. The progress bar crawled across the screen. "Once we have backup secured, we need to find another journalist. Someone who's already investigating financial crime. Someone with enough credibility that Meridian can't easily discredit them. And what if they end up like Melissa Chen?" Grace asked quietly. "Then we find another, and another. We keep going until either they're all exposed or..." Ethan didn't finish the sentence. Grace understood. "Until either they win or we die." The copying finished. Ethan handed Grace one of the drives. "Keep this on you at all times. Don't tell me where you're putting it. Don't write it down. If they catch you, if they threaten you or Naomi, you can't give them all of it. You need leverage." Grace tucked the drive into her bra, the small device cold against her skin. "What about the original? David's drive?" "I keep that. It's the only one with David's fingerprints on it, literally and figuratively. It might be useful later for authentication." Ethan pocketed 2 drives, then held up the third. "This one we need to get somewhere safe. Today." Grace thought for a moment. "The library. The Herald Washington. They have private study rooms you can rent for the day. We could hide it there, taped under a desk or something. It'd be safe for a few hours while we figure out our next move." Ethan nodded slowly. "That works. But you can't be the one to do it. They might have someone watching you now. I'll handle it. Then what do I do?" "You go to your daughter's school. Pick her up, take her somewhere public. McDonald's, a park, somewhere with cameras and witnesses. Don't go home. Don't go anywhere predictable, just keep moving until I contact you. Grace felt fear spike through her. And if you don't contact me? Ethan met her eyes. Then you assume I'm dead or compromised. You take your drive and you run. Change your name, take Naomi, disappear. There's money in my desk. Second drawer, false bottom, $5,000 in cash. Take it. It's yours if things go wrong. The matter-of-fact way he said it made Grace's stomach turn. He was planning for his own death as casually as someone might plan for rain. I don't want your money, Grace said. Take it anyway. Ethan opened the drawer, pulled out a thick envelope, thrust it into her hands. For Naomi, for whatever comes next. Grace stared at the envelope, feeling the weight of bills inside. $5,000, more than she made in 3 months at Sullivan's. Enough to disappear if she had to. Enough to give Naomi a chance. She tucked it into her purse alongside the flash drive. There's something else, Ethan said. Something I haven't told you yet. Grace's heart sank. What? David's note mentioned 12 people involved in the money laundering. Politicians, judges, executives. But there's a 13th name in those files. Someone David didn't mention because he wasn't sure. Someone who, if they're involved, makes this 100 times more dangerous. Who? Ethan pulled up a file on his laptop, turned the screen toward Grace. It was a photo taken from a distance. Grainy, zoomed in, clearly surveillance footage. 2 men shaking hands outside what looked like a private club. One was Gerald Kensington, CEO of Meridian Holdings. The other, Grace's breath caught. The other man was Thomas Garrett, United States Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois, the top federal prosecutor in Chicago, the man responsible for investigating financial crimes, public corruption, organized crime. If Garrett's involved, Ethan said quietly, then we can't trust the FBI, the Justice Department, or anyone in federal law enforcement. They all report to him, which means we're completely on our own. Grace felt the walls closing in. How do we fight someone like that? We don't fight him. We expose him. We make the evidence so public, so undeniable, that he can't bury it. But it has to be done carefully. If we move too fast, he'll crush us. If we move too slow, they'll find us first. Grace's phone buzzed. A text from Naomi. Mom, you're freaking me out a little. What's going on? Grace's hands shook as she typed back. Everything's okay, sweetie. Just want to spend some time with you today. See you at 3:15. She looked at Ethan. I need to go soon. I want to be early. Make sure she's safe. Agreed. But first, Ethan pulled out his phone, opened an app Grace didn't recognize. Give me your phone. Why? Because if they're tracking you, they're doing it through your phone. GPS, cell tower data, maybe even audio surveillance. I need to check it. Grace hesitated, then handed over her phone. Ethan plugged it into his laptop, ran some kind of diagnostic program. Lines of code scrolled across the screen too fast for Grace to follow. After 2 minutes, Ethan's expression darkened. You've got a tracker, software-based, hidden in a system update you downloaded 3 days ago. Grace felt cold. They've been listening to everything? Not listening, tracking. They know everywhere you've been for the last 72 hours. Which means they know you went to Naomi's school this morning. They know you came to the library. They know you're here right now. The room suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. Grace looked toward the window, half expecting to see someone watching from the building across the alley. Can you remove it? She asked. I can, but that'll alert them that you know. Better to leave it and use it against them. Ethan's fingers flew across the keyboard. I'm going to create a false trail. Make it look like you're somewhere else. It'll buy us a few hours, maybe more. How? I'll take your phone with me. Keep it moving around the city. Meanwhile, you use this. Ethan pulled a cheap prepaid phone from his drawer, handed it to Grace. Burner phone. No contract, no tracking. I've already programmed my number in. Use it to contact me and only me. Don't call anyone else. Don't text Naomi from it unless it's an emergency. Grace took the phone, felt how light it was compared to her smartphone. A disposable lifeline. What about Naomi's phone? She asked suddenly. If they tracked mine, they could track hers. Ethan swore under his breath. You're right. When you pick her up, you need to get her phone. Tell her it's broken. Tell her you need to fix something. I don't care. Just get it away from her before you go anywhere. Grace nodded, her mind spinning with everything she needed to remember. Get Naomi. Take her phone. Go somewhere public. Wait for contact. Don't trust anyone. There's one more thing, Ethan said. He pulled a small pistol from his desk drawer, checked the magazine, then held it out to Grace. "Take this." Grace stared at the gun. It was black, compact, terrifyingly real. "I don't know how to use that. It's a Glock 43 9mm. Safety here, trigger here, point and pull. 15 feet or less, you don't need to be a good shot." Ethan's voice was calm, instructional, like he was teaching her to use a coffee maker. "I'm not saying you'll need it. I'm saying you should have the option." Grace's hands trembled as she reached for the weapon. It was heavier than she expected, cold and solid. She'd never held a gun before. Marcus had hated them, refused to keep one in the house even when their neighborhood got rough. "I don't think I can." "You can," Ethan interrupted firmly. "If someone threatens Naomi, you'll find out exactly what you're capable of. Trust me on that." Grace tucked the gun into her purse, felt the weight of it settle next to the cash and the flash drive. She was carrying more value, and more danger, than she'd ever held in her life. "I need to go," she said. "I want to be at the school by 2:30. Ethan nodded. "I'll handle the third drive, then start building our false trail. When I contact you, probably around 6 or 7 tonight, we'll figure out our next move. Until then, keep Naomi close, keep your head down, and don't trust anyone." Grace stood, shouldered her purse. At the door, she turned back. "Ethan, what if this doesn't work? What if we can't stop them?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, his eyes on Amanda's photo. "Then at least we tried. That's more than most people do." It wasn't reassuring, but it was honest. Grace left the office, descended the creaking stairs, emerged into the alley behind the building. The November air was cold, heavy with the promise of snow. She walked quickly toward the street, every instinct screaming at her to run. She was 2 blocks away when she saw the black sedan. It was parked across the street, engine running, windows tinted. As Grace walked past, she saw the driver's side door open. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark suit that looked wrong for the cold weather. The same man from Naomi's school. Grace's heart hammered. She kept walking, didn't run, didn't look back. Used every ounce of discipline she'd learned from 6 years of being invisible. She turned a corner, walked another block, then ducked into a Walgreens. She moved quickly to the back of the store, hid behind a display of cold medicine, and watched the entrance through a gap in the shelves. The man entered 30 seconds later. He walked slowly down the aisle, scanning faces, clearly searching for her. Grace's hand moved to her purse, felt the shape of the gun. "Point and pull," Ethan had said. 15 feet or less. But the store was full of people, families, elderly shoppers. If she pulled that gun, if she fired, the man's phone rang. He answered it, listened, then turned and walked back toward the exit. Grace caught a fragment of his conversation. "Lost her. North on State. I'll circle back." He left. Grace waited 5 full minutes, her heart pounding so hard she felt dizzy. Then she slipped out through the pharmacy exit at the back of the store, emerged onto a different street and flagged down a taxi. "Wilson High School," she told the driver. "Fast as you can." As the taxi pulled away, Grace looked back and saw the black sedan still circling the block, still searching. They knew where she'd been. They knew what she looked like. They were hunting her, but they didn't have Naomi yet. And Grace would burn the world down before she let them touch her daughter. The taxi dropped Grace 3 blocks from the school. She paid cash, told the driver to keep the change, then walked the rest of the way. It was 2:43 p.m., half an hour early, but she didn't care. She positioned herself across the street from the school's main entrance, partially hidden behind a bus stop shelter, and watched. Watched for black sedans. Watched for men in suits that didn't belong. Watched for anything that felt wrong. The minutes crawled past. Students began trickling out of the building. Early dismissals. Kids skipping last period. Grace ignored them all, her eyes fixed on the entrance, waiting for Naomi. At 3:14, Naomi emerged, backpack slung over one shoulder, talking to a friend. Grace's chest tightened with relief so intense it was almost painful. She stepped out from behind the shelter, waved. "Naomi!" Her daughter looked up, surprised, then waved back and jogged across the street. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Grace pulled Naomi into a tight hug, held her for a moment longer than necessary. "I told you I was picking you up." "Yeah, but are you okay? You're shaking." Grace forced herself to let go, to smile. "I'm fine. Just cold. Come on, let's go get something to eat." They started walking. Naomi chattered about her history test, about drama club tryouts, about some boy named Marcus. Marcus, like her father, who'd asked her to the winter dance. Grace listened, nodded, kept her eyes scanning the street behind them. Mom, seriously, what's going on? Naomi asked after a few blocks. You're acting really weird. I need to borrow your phone, Grace said. Just for tonight. Mine's acting up and I need to make some calls. Naomi frowned. Can't you just use yours? Naomi, please. Something in Grace's voice must have registered because Naomi pulled her phone from her pocket and handed it over without further argument. Grace immediately powered it down, removed the battery, a trick Ethan had mentioned, and tucked both pieces into her purse. They reached a McDonald's on the corner of 79th and Ashland. Inside, it was warm and brightly lit, filled with after-school crowds. Safe, public, visible. Grace bought them both meals they didn't eat, found a table in the back corner where she could see both exits and waited. Waited for Ethan to call, waited for the men in black sedans to find them, waited for her daughter to realize that their lives had just been shattered. Naomi picked at her fries, watching Grace with worried eyes. Mom, you're scaring me. Grace reached across the table, took her daughter's hand. I know, baby, and I'm sorry, but I need you to trust me right now. We're going to be okay, I promise. It was a lie, but it was the only comfort Grace had left to give. The burner phone rang at 6:47 p.m. Grace and Naomi had been sitting in that McDonald's for 3 hours, watching daylight fade through the windows, watching customers come and go, watching Naomi's confusion slowly harden into something closer to fear. Grace had deflected questions, bought more food neither of them wanted, and kept her hand close to her purse where the gun waited. When the phone finally vibrated, Grace nearly dropped it. Hello? It's me. Ethan's voice was tight, strained. Are you and Naomi safe? Yes, still at the McDonald's. What happened? They found the office. I got out 10 minutes before they arrived, but it was close. Too close. Grace heard traffic in the background, the wail of a distant siren. They're escalating. I counted 3 teams combing the loop. They know we have the files, and they're desperate to contain this before we can go public. Grace glanced at Naomi, who was watching her with wide, frightened eyes. What do? We end this. Tonight. Ethan's voice was firm now, decisive. I've been working on something while I was moving around the city, a way to expose everything at once to so many people that Meridian can't possibly suppress it all. How? Social media, mainstream media, watchdog organizations, federal agencies outside Chicago, all simultaneously. We upload the files to WikiLeaks, send copies to the New York Times, Washington Post, ProPublica. We tag every financial crimes unit, every congressman on the banking committee, every journalist who's ever investigated corporate fraud. We flood the zone so completely that even with Thomas Garrett's influence, they can't stop it. Grace felt her heart racing. That's huge. That's declaring war. We're already at war, Ethan said quietly. They killed David. They killed Amanda. They killed Melissa Chen. They're hunting you right now. The only question is whether we fight back. Grace looked at her daughter, 14 years old, terrified, caught in something she didn't understand. Everything in Grace screamed to protect Naomi, to run, to disappear into whatever invisible life they could cobble together. But then she thought about David's note. You're invisible, Grace. That's your superpower. Use it. She'd been invisible for so long she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen, to matter, to have a voice that someone actually heard. What do you need from me? Grace asked. Meet me at Union Station, main hall, under the big board. Bring everything. The drive, the cash, everything. We'll upload from there. It's public, it's crowded, and it has exits in 6 different directions. If something goes wrong, you grab Naomi and you run. Grace checked her watch. When? 8 o'clock. That gives us an hour to get into position. Grace? Ethan paused. I need you to understand something. Once we do this, there's no going back. Your life changes forever. Naomi's life changes forever. You'll be famous or infamous depending on who you ask. You'll be a target for lawsuits, for threats, maybe for violence. But you'll also be a hero. You'll be the person who took down one of the biggest financial crimes in U.S. history. I don't want to be a hero, Grace said quietly. I just want my daughter to be safe. Then this is how we do it. We expose them so publicly that killing you becomes more trouble than it's worth. We make you too visible to disappear. The irony wasn't lost on Grace. Survival through visibility. Protection through exposure. Okay, she said. We'll be there. Grace, bring the gun. Just in case. The line went dead. Grace pocketed the phone and looked at Naomi. Her daughter was pale, her hands clenched around a cold coffee cup. Mom, Naomi said, her voice small. What's happening? Grace reached across the table, took both of Naomi's hands in hers. Baby, I need to tell you something. And I need you to be strong, because what I'm about to say is going to be scary. For the next 10 minutes, Grace told her daughter everything. About David Thornton, about the money laundering, about the people who'd been killed, about the flash drive hidden in her bra and the gun hidden in her purse, about the choice she'd made to fight back instead of run. Naomi listened without interrupting, her eyes growing wider with each revelation. When Grace finished, her daughter was silent for a long moment. Uncle David, Naomi finally said, the one from Dad's funeral, the one who gave me that stuffed bear. Grace had forgotten about the bear. Naomi had been 6, crying inconsolably, and David had pulled a small brown bear from his car, said it had belonged to his daughter, that it was magic, that it would keep Naomi safe. He didn't have a daughter, Grace said softly. He just wanted you to feel better. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. And they killed him? Yes. Because he found out about the money? Yes. Naomi wiped her eyes roughly. Then we have to stop them. We have to make sure they don't hurt anyone else. Grace felt pride surge through her chest, fierce and aching. Baby, this is dangerous. If something goes wrong, then something goes wrong. Naomi interrupted, her voice steadier now. But you taught me that doing the right thing isn't about whether it's safe. It's about whether it's right. This is right, Mom. Grace pulled her daughter into a hug, felt Naomi's arms wrap around her, felt the trembling that betrayed how scared she really was. But scared and brave weren't opposites. Grace was learning that now. Okay, Grace whispered. Okay, we do this together. They took the red line to Union Station, got off one stop early and walked the rest of the way. Grace kept Naomi close, her hand on her daughter's shoulder, her eyes scanning every face they passed. The city felt different now. Every shadow held potential danger. Every stranger might be working for Meridian. Union Station's great hall was exactly as Grace remembered from the few times she'd been there. Vast, echoing, beautiful in a way that made her feel small. The departure board dominated one wall, listing trains to everywhere from Milwaukee to New Orleans. Beneath it, hundreds of people moved in purposeful streams, commuters heading home, travelers dragging luggage, homeless men sleeping on benches. Grace saw Ethan immediately. He stood near a coffee kiosk wearing a different jacket, a baseball cap pulled low. Their eyes met across the hall. He nodded once. Grace and Naomi approached carefully. Ethan's gaze flicked to Naomi, then back to Grace. This is your daughter? Naomi, this is Ethan. Ethan, Naomi. Ma'am, Ethan said with surprising formality. Then to Grace, did anyone follow you? I don't think so. We took precautions. Good. Ethan pulled out a laptop bag. I've been setting up for the last hour. Free Wi-Fi, VPN to mask our location, upload protocols ready. Once we start, it'll take about 15 minutes to distribute everything. During that time, we're vulnerable. Meridian will detect the uploads, they'll trace them here, and they'll send people. So we need to be ready to move fast. Grace pulled the flash drive from her bra, handed it to Ethan. He didn't comment on where she'd been keeping it, just plugged it into his laptop and began working. Naomi watched, fascinated and frightened. Is that really everything? All the proof? Everything David died to protect, Ethan said quietly. Bank records, audio recordings, names, dates, transactions. $2.3 billion laundered through 12 different institutions over 4 years. Once this goes public, it'll be the biggest financial scandal since Enron. His fingers flew across the keyboard. Windows opened and closed. Progress bars began crawling across the screen. WikiLeaks uploading. New York Times Secure Drop uploading. Washington Post, ProPublica, Reuters, tagging the SEC, the FBI, the Treasury Department. Grace watched the departure board, watched the people moving through the hall, tried to spot anyone who looked wrong, anyone who might be. Grace. She turned. A woman stood 10 feet away, mid-30s, black, wearing a professional pantsuit and carrying a leather briefcase. Her face was familiar, but Grace couldn't place it. I'm sorry to bother you, the woman said, her voice carefully neutral. But I work for Meridian Holdings. My name is Patricia Webb, and I'm here to offer you a deal. Grace's hand moved toward her purse. Ethan's head snapped up from his laptop. Naomi pressed closer to her mother. We don't want a deal, Grace said. Patricia held up her hands, showing they were empty. Please just listen, I'm not armed. I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here because my boss, Mr. Kensington, understands that you have certain materials. Materials that could be embarrassing if made public. Embarrassing? Grace's voice was sharp. You mean evidence of murder? I mean documents that could be misinterpreted, Patricia said smoothly. Documents that in the wrong hands might look incriminating but actually have perfectly legal explanations. Mr. Kensington would like to offer you $2 million to return those documents and sign a non-disclosure agreement. The number hung in the air like smoke. $2 million. Enough to change everything. Enough to send Naomi to any college she wanted. Enough to never worry about rent or repossession or invisibility again. Grace looked at Ethan. His expression was unreadable, but his fingers had stopped moving on the keyboard. The uploads were still running. Grace could see the progress bars ticking upward, but Ethan was waiting, letting her decide. And if we refuse? Grace asked Patricia. Then things get complicated, Patricia said. Her voice remained pleasant, but something cold entered her eyes. Your daughter is 14. Woodrow Wilson High School. Honor roll, drama club, dreams of studying medicine. You work at Sullivan's Steakhouse, 6 years, never promoted, 3 months behind on rent. Your husband died in a construction accident that was ruled accidental despite some irregularities in the safety equipment. Grace felt ice flood her veins. You're threatening my family? I'm stating facts, Patricia said. Facts that demonstrate how vulnerable you are, how much you have to lose. Mr. Kensington is offering you a way out, a chance to take care of your daughter, to secure her future. All you have to do is stop the uploads and walk away. Grace looked at the laptop. The progress bars were at 67%, 70%, 73%. She thought about David Thornton, dead at 46. Amanda Caldwell, dead at 24. Melissa Chen, drowned in Lake Michigan. All the invisible people who'd been crushed because they saw something they weren't supposed to see. She thought about Marcus, under that scaffolding. About how the safety inspector's report had been filed late, signed by someone who'd retired 2 weeks before. About all the questions Grace had never asked, because she'd been too busy surviving. She thought about Naomi, growing up in a world where people like Gerald Kensington could kill with impunity and buy their way out of consequences. $2 million is a lot of money, Grace said quietly. Patricia smiled. It is. More than most people see in a lifetime. Think about what it could do for Naomi. But it's not enough, Grace interrupted. Her voice was steady now, certain. Because you can't buy back the people you murdered. You can't buy back my husband or David or all the others. And you definitely can't buy me. Patricia's smile faded. Miss Thompson, I would strongly advise you to reconsider. Uploads complete, Ethan said suddenly. His voice was loud enough to carry, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Files are live. WikiLeaks confirms receipt. New York Times confirms receipt. Washington Post confirms receipt. The story's out. Patricia's face went white. She reached into her briefcase. Grace's hand was faster. She pulled the gun from her purse, pointed it at Patricia's chest. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't waver. Don't, Grace said simply. Around them, people screamed, scattered. The great hall erupted into chaos. Patricia froze, her hand still inside the briefcase. You're making a mistake. No, Grace said. I'm fixing one. Security guards were running toward them now, shouting. Grace didn't lower the gun, didn't move. Just kept it trained on Patricia until the guards reached them. Until someone, a large man in a Navy uniform, carefully took the weapon from Grace's hand. She threatened my daughter, Grace said clearly. She works for Meridian Holdings. She was trying to stop us from exposing financial crimes. It's all documented. Check the news, check WikiLeaks. It's already public. The security guard looked confused, overwhelmed. Patricia was already talking, claiming innocence, demanding to speak to someone in charge. But Ethan was right. The story was out. Grace could see it on people's phones as they emerged from hiding. Could see the headlines already spreading across social media. Massive money laundering scheme exposed. Meridian Holdings CEO implicated in murders. U.S. Attorney Thomas Garrett under investigation. It was happening. Right now. Faster than Meridian could suppress it. Patricia saw it too. Grace watched understanding dawn on the woman's face. Understanding that she'd failed, that the secret she'd been sent to protect was now known by millions. You don't know what you've done, Patricia whispered. Yes, Grace said quietly. I do. The next 3 hours were a blur of police statements, interviews, lawyers arriving, journalists pushing through crowds trying to get comments. Grace told the truth, all of it repeatedly, to anyone who would listen. Told them about David, about the flash drive, about the threats. Ethan did the same, backing up every detail. Naomi sat beside her mother through all of it, holding her hand, refusing to be separated. By midnight, federal agents arrived. Not from Chicago, Ethan had made sure of that, but from Washington, sent by the Inspector General's office. They took copies of everything, promised protection, promised investigation. By morning, Gerald Kensington was in federal custody. Thomas Garrett had resigned. 3 other executives from Meridian Holdings were being questioned. The story dominated every news outlet, cable news, newspapers, social media, everything. By the end of the week, Grace Thompson's face was everywhere. The cleaning woman who'd taken down a corrupt empire, the mother who'd fought back, the invisible woman who'd become impossible to ignore. 3 months later, Grace stood in the kitchen of their new apartment, still in Chicago, still in a neighborhood she could afford, but brighter somehow, safer. Naomi was at the table doing homework, earbuds in, occasionally singing along to whatever music streamed through her phone. The book advance had helped. Grace was writing her story, a real publisher, a real editor, a real chance to tell what had happened in her own words. The money wasn't $2 million, but it was enough. Enough for Naomi's college fund. Enough to quit Sullivan's, enough to breathe. There'd been threats, of course, letters from Meridian supporters calling her a liar, online harassment, a brick through their window the second week. But there'd also been support. Thousands of messages from people who'd been invisible their whole lives, who saw themselves in Grace's story. Ethan texted occasionally. He was testifying before a grand jury, helping prosecutors build cases against everyone involved. Amanda's death was being reinvestigated. So was Marcus's. Grace tried not to think about what they might find. The doorbell rang. Grace checked the camera, installed by federal marshals as part of their witness protection accommodations, and saw a delivery person holding a small package. She opened the door carefully, signed for the package. It was addressed to her, no return address, postmarked from New York. Inside was a simple card and a USB drive. The card read, "For Grace Thompson, who reminded us why journalism matters. Thank you. The family of Melissa Chen." Grace held the card for a long moment, feeling the weight of it, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, everything that had changed. "Mom?" Naomi called from the kitchen. "You okay?" "Yeah, baby," Grace called back. "I'm okay." And she was. Not safe, not completely, maybe not ever, but okay, visible, present, real. Grace Thompson had spent 6 years being invisible, being ignored, being treated like she didn't matter. She'd never be invisible again. And in the end, that was worth everything. 1 year later, the book became a bestseller. Grace appeared on morning shows, gave talks at universities, testified before Congress about corporate accountability and financial crime. Naomi thrived, accepted to Northwestern on a full scholarship, planning to study law, wanting to fight the same battles her mother had. Gerald Kensington was convicted on 12 counts of money laundering and 3 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. Thomas Garrett pleaded guilty to corruption charges, disbarred, 10 years. 6 other executives from Meridian Holdings faced similar fates. The money, $2, $3 billion, was frozen, seized, slowly being returned to defrauded investors and victims' families. And Grace Thompson, who'd once cleaned tables without being noticed, now walked through the world knowing that she'd been seen, that she'd mattered. That one woman, armed with nothing but truth and courage, had changed everything. David Thornton's name was engraved on a memorial at the SEC building in Washington, alongside other whistleblowers who died protecting the public interest. Marcus Thompson's death was officially reclassified as a homicide. The investigation was ongoing. And somewhere in Chicago, in restaurants and offices and homes across the city, there were still invisible people. Still workers who weren't seen, weren't valued, weren't heard. But they all knew Grace's story now. They all knew that being invisible was a choice. And they all knew that sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can do is finally let yourself be seen. Grace stood at David Thornton's grave on a cold December morning, exactly 2 years after that night at Sullivan's Steakhouse. She placed fresh flowers beside the headstone, white lilies, his favorite, according to his sister who'd reached out after the trial ended. "You were right," Grace said quietly to the stone, "about me being invisible, about that being a superpower. I just wish you were here to see what happened." Naomi stood beside her, now 16, taller than her mother, confident in ways Grace had never been at that age. "Do you think he knew?" Naomi asked. "That leaving that note would change everything?" "I think he hoped," Grace said. Hope was all he had left. Behind them, Ethan waited by his car. He'd become something unexpected. Not quite family, not quite friend, but someone who understood what it meant to carry the weight of the dead. He visited Amanda's grave every Sunday. Grace joined him sometimes. As they walked back to the car, Grace's phone buzzed. Another interview request. Another speaking engagement. Another person who wanted to hear how an invisible woman had become impossible to ignore. She didn't answer it right away. Instead, she looked at her daughter, healthy, safe, alive, and thought about all the people who hadn't made it, who'd stayed invisible, who'd been silenced. "Mom?" Naomi asked, seeing something in her mother's face. "Just remembering," Grace said softly, "what it felt like to be nobody. So I never forget why being somebody matters." They drove away from the cemetery, leaving flowers and memories behind, carrying forward the weight of being seen, a burden Grace would carry for the rest of her life. But she carried it willingly, 'cause some things were worth the wait.